Okay, let's dive into something kind of volatile, like seriously volatile, the situation in Ukraine and the potential fallout from some big policy changes from the U.S.
Right, yeah.
So to kind of set the stage, President Trump has paused military support to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And that has kind of thrown everyone into a bit of a tizzy.
Yeah.
Zelensky, meanwhile, is saying, no, we're going to keep fighting. We're going to get the Russians out completely.
Mm.
But then you've got European leaders saying, look, we can't keep funding this thing without the U.S.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got all the pundits and the analysts coming out. And some are saying Zelensky's a hero for this. Some are saying this is a terrible strategic move. And then, you always get those that are concerned about corruption.
Right.
So, I mean, where does this leave us? Can Ukraine really fight without the U.S.? What's the cost if they do? I mean, is this the right move from Zelensky? What's President Trump's end game here?
Mm-hmm.
And what's he going to do next? I mean, these are some pretty big questions.
Yeah, you really see this, interplay of this desire to push back against Russia, and then also this dependence, right, on the U.S. to help with that. And so I think it's really fascinating to watch this play out.
It really is. And, it reminds me of when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah.
Remember what happened there? It was just chaos, and those Afghan forces just collapsed. I mean, could that happen in Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a really crucial parallel to think about. Those soldiers in Afghanistan, they were fighting hard. But when the U.S. pulled out, I think it really did create this sense of abandonment. Yeah. And ultimately, I think that's part of what led to them falling apart so quickly. And I think we have to consider that could happen in Ukraine, too.
Yeah. That's a tough pill to swallow, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Zelensky has just refused to negotiate with Putin over and over again. Even when Putin has offered him deals that maybe weren't ideal, but they would stop the fighting. What is he thinking?
Well, if we look at his public statements, one thing that's really clear is that Zelensky has become this international symbol of resistance.
Right.
And that has to be influencing his decisions. He can't be seen as weak.
Right.
And any concession, even if it's strategically smart, might damage his image. It could even hurt his support within Ukraine.
So it's almost like he's kind of trapped by his own success.
Yeah. Exactly. And let's not forget about the internal politics of this too, right?
Mm-hmm.
For Zelensky, continuing to fight, no matter the cost, it might be the only way for him to stay in power.
Okay, yeah, I get that. But what about Trump? What's his perspective on all this?
Right. To understand President Trump, I think you have to look at what he said in the past and just his overall view on foreign policy. He has always said that he wants to end this war. He's made that very clear.
Right.
And he's getting increasingly frustrated with Zelensky for refusing to negotiate. And he's also really concerned about the people of Ukraine. This is a devastating conflict for them. He's spoken about that a lot. And then you look at some of his recent posts on Truth Social. It really seems like he's getting ready to pull out all U.S. support if Zelensky doesn't agree to negotiate.
Oh, wow. So he's basically saying, I want to help, but you got to meet me halfway.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And, his actions are really showing that his patience is wearing thin. And this could be a moment where what he does next has a huge impact on the war.
And then, of course, you have the European leaders who are kind of caught in the middle of all this. They're saying they support Ukraine. But they need the U.S. to fund it all. So what if the U.S. pulls out completely?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Right.
It would be a big blow to European security. It would force them to make some tough choices about their own defense and how much they're willing to do on their own to help Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a lot to put on their shoulders all of a sudden. And then there's this whole issue of corruption in the Ukrainian government. It's hard to know what's true and what's not in the middle of a war. But those accusations are out there.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a valid concern. Making sure that any aid, especially from the U.S., is being used properly and transparently is essential.
Right.
There's been talk about using DOGE audits to track where the money's going. DOGE, with all its fancy technology and focus on transparency, it could really help to clear things up.
Interesting. So we've got a lot to unpack here. Zelensky's unwavering stance, President Trump pushing for negotiations, the possibility of the U.S. pulling out, and then this whole corruption issue. But we've only just scratched the surface.
It's important to remember this isn't something new. This tension has been building for years. Zelensky has had chances to find a peaceful solution, even when the terms were much better for Ukraine.
Right, yeah. This has been going on for a while. It's not like this just happened overnight. To really understand what's happening now, We need to go back, like way back to 2015, and those Minsk agreements.
Those Minsk agreements were huge. I mean, they were supposed to de-escalate the conflict in eastern Ukraine. They were going to give those Russian-speaking regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, some autonomy. If Zelensky's predecessor had actually followed through on those agreements, or even Zelensky himself when he came into office in 2019, things could be so different right now.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Every time they missed a chance to de-escalate, they just got closer and closer to this war.
Exactly. The Minsk agreements, they weren't perfect, but they offered a way out. They could have protected those Russian speakers in the East. It was a compromise, sure, but it might have prevented this whole war.
But Zelensky, even though he campaigned on peace, he decided to go in a different direction.
He did, and that decision has had some major consequences. Then, in 2021, Putin tried again. He offered another deal. It wasn't as good as Minsk, but it would have kept the fighting contained to just those two regions, Luhansk and Donetsk.
And Zelensky said no again.
He did, and that's when things really started to heat up. Putin saw that as Zelensky slamming the door on diplomacy. So he recognized those two regions as independent. And just 2 days later, the invasion began.
So many missed opportunities to calm things down. Wasn't there another chance in 2022, right when the war started?
You're talking about the talks in Istanbul.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a couple months into the war, they tried to work something out. But once again, Zelensky walked away. Then by 2023, things were looking pretty bad for Ukraine militarily. Analysts were saying they just didn't have the resources to push Russia back, but Zelensky still went ahead with this huge offensive, and it failed.
And with each failed offensive, the costs just keep piling up.
That's the really sad part of all this. In June 2024, Putin offered another deal. This time it was much harsher. He wanted Ukraine to give up 4 entire provinces, shrink their military, and limit their alliances.
Those are some tough demands. It must have been a really hard choice for Zelensky.
Absolutely. But, when you're a leader and you see what's happening on the battlefield, you have to consider all your options, even the painful ones. But Zelensky refused again. A lot of people thought he should have taken that deal, even though it was tough.
And now here we are, March 2025. And Trump is offering what might be the last chance for a negotiated solution. And what's really interesting is that Trump isn't coming at this from a position of weakness. He actually cares about the people of Ukraine. He wants the fighting to stop. He wants peace. Even if it's not perfect, it might be the best way to stop things from getting even worse.
Right. Trump's not saying Ukraine should just give up. He's saying Zelensky needs to be realistic. He needs to see how things are on the ground. And he needs to consider a path that could save lives and prevent more destruction. It's a hard truth, but the longer this war goes on, the worse the deal is going to be for Ukraine in the end.
So what's Zelensky going to do? Is he going to take this chance? Or is he going to keep fighting and risk losing everything?
It's a huge decision, and it will not only affect Ukraine, it could change things for the whole world.
Let's talk about those potential consequences. If Zelensky decides to negotiate, it's probably going to take a long time, and it'll be hard. But it could mean the fighting stops. It could mean Ukraine has a chance to rebuild. It could mean things start to get back to normal eventually.
But even if they do negotiate, it won't be easy. Both sides will have to give up some things. And there's no guarantee they'll actually find a way to make peace. This war has created a lot of pain and anger, and it's going to be really hard to build trust again.
And if Zelensky decides to keep fighting, that's a risky move, especially with Trump talking about pulling all U.S. support.
If Zelensky goes that way and Trump actually pulls out all support, it could be disastrous for Ukraine. Their army is already struggling. They rely so much on the U.S., they could lose very quickly.
And if Russia wins, what then?
A Russian victory would be a big deal for the whole world. It would make Putin even more powerful. He might try to take over other countries in the region. It would totally change the balance of power. And it would send a message to other countries that might want to challenge Russia. Don't even try.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. It's a tough choice for Zelensky. No easy answers. Whatever he decides, it will affect everyone, not just Ukraine.
It really shows how much power one person can have. The decisions that Zelensky and Trump make in the next few days could change the course of this war, and it could change the world for years to come.
We've covered a lot. Zelensky's refusal to budge, Trump pushing for a deal, the U.S. possibly pulling out, and all those corruption accusations. But we haven't even talked about the corruption issue in detail yet.
Yeah. That's a tough one. It's hard to know what's true with all the fog of war going on. There's so much information, and a lot of it is just propaganda. But those accusations are there. And they make you wonder if the aid, especially the money from the US, is actually being used the right way.
People are talking about weapons being sold on the black market, contracts that cost way more than they should, and money just disappearing. Sounds like a spy movie.
It does, but this is real life. And if that's happening, it's a big problem. It hurts the war effort. And it makes people lose trust in Ukraine, both inside the country and around the world. It makes people think that all the aid is just being wasted.
And that's why people are talking about Doge audits, right?
Exactly. Doge could change everything. It's got all that amazing technology. It's all about transparency.
Yeah.
A Doge audit could show exactly how the U.S. money has been spent in Ukraine. It could show if anything shady is going on, hold people accountable, and make everyone trust the system again.
But haven't some people been against Doge audits?
Yeah, there has been some resistance, mostly from people in the Ukrainian government and their allies. They say things like, it violates our sovereignty, or it'll take too much time and effort during a war. But, some people think those are just excuses to hide things.
It's like everyone's trying to protect their own interests, but when you're talking about so much money being spent, especially in a war zone, transparency should be the #1 priority.
Absolutely. It's about being accountable, not just to the American people who are paying for most of this aid, but to the people of Ukraine who need it to survive and rebuild their lives.
It's a good reminder that just because there's a war going on, it doesn't mean people can get away with being corrupt or wasting money. In fact, during a crisis, leaders need to be even more ethical and responsible with the resources they have.
And Doge audits could be a big part of that. It could change the way we monitor aid in all future conflicts, using technology to make things transparent and stop people from taking advantage of these situations.
So we've looked at the history of this whole thing, what's motivating the key players, and what might happen depending on what they do. But what does it all mean? What does this conflict tell us about the world, about democracy, and about the balance of power, especially with everything changing so fast?
This whole thing in Ukraine, it's not just some regional conflict. It's like a symptom of something much bigger going on in the world right now. You've got these big powers like vying for control again. You've got countries not trusting each other. And this whole idea of a rules-based international system, the one that's been keeping things kind of stable for decades, it's starting to break down.
Yeah, it's like a big reality check, isn't it? Yeah. We have to face some hard truths about how power works, how much diplomacy can actually achieve, and how, conflict just keeps coming back.
The thing is, what happens in Ukraine will have consequences everywhere. It's going to reshape the whole geopolitical landscape, maybe for generations to come.
It's a pretty daunting thought, but there are some hopeful signs too. I mean, look at how the world has responded to Russia. All the support for Ukraine, the efforts to, hold those responsible accountable. It shows that people still want a more just and peaceful world.
Yeah, that's true. Even in the darkest times, there's still this human capacity for compassion and cooperation. The bravery of the people in Ukraine, their resilience, and the people around the world who are standing with them, it's pretty inspiring. It shows that hope is still alive.
This deep dive, it's really been a journey. We've gone deep into this conflict, trying to understand what's driving the key players and what could happen next. But the truth is, we don't know what the future holds. The decisions that are made the next few days, weeks, months, they will determine how this all plays out.
Absolutely. We've only scratched the surface here. This conflict, it's a mix of history, geopolitics, and human drama. And the story is still being written.
It's up to all of us to, really think about what we've learned, to come to our own conclusions, and to figure out what we can do to create a more peaceful and just world.
Yeah. Staying informed, questioning what we hear, and looking at things from different perspectives, those are all really important things to do, especially with everything going on in the world today.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. We're here to help you make sense of things, to give you the knowledge you need to form your own opinions. Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.